Within the scope of life, we often wonder about the morality of living without laws or rules. Would some humans uphold some notion of good behavior without being forced to? Or will they devolve into some primal debauchery of crime and taboo the minute they're liberated of their constraints? The best way, perhaps, to experience this in its fullest extent is to experience it through the medium of video games, specifically sandbox games. What is a sandbox game? It's a game that's meant to represent the functionality of a sandbox. A game that's intended for creativity that has a general lack of rules, goals, or purpose. One game of this genre that is well known and still played is Rust. Rust is a game focused on surviving on an island with hundreds of other players. Due to its sandbox nature, there are no real goals, missions, no end in sight for gameplay, merely build, live, and destroy at your leisure until the map you're on wipes and resets so you can do it all again. Rust is one of the few games that comes closer to being a simulation more than it does being a game. And with it comes the question we just asked. Without rules or laws, how would humans respond? This brings us to the thesis question that I'm posing for this video. With this setting, what motivates people's behavior, and is behavior out of self-preservation technically evil? For starters, let's get some definitions out of the way for our dissection of Rust and games similar to it. To properly explain the mechanics behind Rust's ecosystem, we need to define what a naked is in terms of players, what a Zerg and clan is in terms of player formation, and what a role player and griefing is in terms of player behavior. Lastly, we have a few philosophical terms to define, being egoism, altruism, sadism, empathy, and psychopathy. Along with these, another more modern term, trolling, will be defined as well. For the sake of video length, I'm going to have the definitions display on screen so the video can be paused and they can be read. Now that we have definitions out of the way, let's proceed with explaining what an experience in Rust is like. When you begin Rust, there's a multitude of servers available to pick from. Some are official game developer servers, while others are community-based or even modified servers with different rules and functionality. When you've chosen a server and loaded into the map, you'll be greeted with the sight of waking up on a beach. You begin the game completely and utterly naked, with nothing but a torch in case it's dark, and a rock to smash things with for resources. You have a calorie bar, a hydration bar, and a bar representing your overall health. If you dehydrate, you can't run. If you starve, you slowly lose health over time. If you run out of health from taking damage, you're downed and can be rescued by another player. During this time, your inventory is open for all to see, with the downed player functioning somewhat like a living in-game container. Even when players log out, they exist within the world, asleep in a similar state of public access to anyone who can stand next to them and activate them like a container. Keep this information in mind because it comes into play later when we discuss how players tend to interact. If a player loses all of their HP from starving or suffocating underwater, or from being way too cold, they immediately die without being drowned. Rust even features a temperature system with extreme hots and colds, with both interacting with a player's overall wetness the same way that they would in real life. Rust has gone above and beyond to simulate reality, even including a button on the keyboard that allows the player to maintain their body in a certain orientation while being able to freely turn their neck to look around or even behind them as they walk or run or perform any other tasks. Features like this are important because Rust is full of danger, and it's definitely found in wildlife, but more than anything, it's found in other players. Humans are social creatures and are often found forming groups for safety. That can also be found within Rust. Players form clans with one another, shown by a name or an acronym for one preceding a player's name. Just like countries and towns within real life, clans go to war sometimes and fight battles that can be large-scale enough to entirely disrupt a server's environment. However, it's not easy to join many clans. Usually, it requires you needing to know someone outside the game in order to get in, or getting to know someone in-game, which is hard due to one major rule players within Rust follow very, very dedicatedly. Trust no one.
You're just about ready to play Rust. I'm glad you're excited. There's just one more thing. The final rule, the most important of them all, is never trust anyone. Even me. Enjoy.
Trust seems to be very frowned upon within Rust. People tend to prioritize their own safety above making friends. Shoot on sight, that's something you'll hear a lot in Rust. Even if a player is naked, shoot on sight. The big question is, why shoot on sight? Surely everyone's been a fresh player once, getting continually killed over and over. There's more than enough resources for some players, and others just harvest and build, without interacting violently with others. Yet a vast majority of players will kill on sight unprovoked, and will even pursue you if you flee. Self-preservation is indeed important. Most humans will satisfy their most basic needs out of a need of egoism before moving on to altruism, but players who have a weapon or tool have them visibly on their bodies. Any armor or clothing can be seen clearly, and any tools equipped are in hand. Even if a player isn't technically equipped with tools, but still has them in their inventory, there's a cloth sash on the player model to indicate that they have some means of carrying items on their naked body. So players who truly, honestly have nothing are very distinct from those who obviously have clothes, but even from those who have made tools and have items, but still remain unclothed and naked. Yet despite all that, nakeds are often killed regardless, even though their assailant knows from experience playing the game that there are no items to be looted from this player, and no real threat beyond having a rock thrown at you. All they're doing is inconveniencing them by forcing them back to their respawn point. Players can be harvested for resources, however, making for a very minor reason to assault naked players. But in many cases, players can return to their corpse and will find it unharvested, meaning that collecting bones or animal fat wasn't even the reason for assault. According to Young-An Hu and Dae-Yang Liu's article, Altruism versus Egoism in Human Behavior, they discuss how Dennis Muller's 1986 study reveals that humans have two natures, a selfish nature and a cooperative, altruistic nature, and that one makes decisions in some contexts using one's selfish nature and the other using one's altruistic, cooperative nature. In a game with survival elements that isn't outlandish to put aside altruism to fulfill egoistic need of survival through making other players into resources, considering they can just respawn. However, when the corpse is left untouched, that lays outside the mentality. If there was no egoistic need to be satisfied, wouldn't that leave room for more altruistic behavior? Sometimes, yes, friendliness does happen, and people even give gifts to one another, but it's very rare. Because so many players get mercilessly killed after freshly spawning into the world, a kill before being killed mentality begins to form. A number of factors concerning heightened self-concern can lower the likelihood of altruistic acts. First, self-preoccupation might keep people from being immediately aware of social goals calling for helpful behavior in certain situations. Second, worry about oneself, apprehensions about one's self-worth, dreams of success, or fear of failure in important activities all may distract people from thinking of helping others. Third, despite the evidence that empathy usually leads to helping, there is still a range of empathetic arousal that is determined by individuals' levels of distress tolerance. Beyond that range, self-concern might interfere with empathy. So even in situations where someone has nothing, self-concern could get in the way of cooperation, especially after being exposed to specific stimuli, such as repeated death being forced to restart time and time again. The more this happens, the higher the player's distress level, but this repeated death also leads to the spread of this behavior of attacking people on sight. Cruelty may also be the byproduct of violence, says Micah HF. In particular, torturers do not have a certain kind of personality, only exposure to certain kinds of psychological, social, and political conditions. In other words, to emulate this behavior, it doesn't require being that way from the start, simply exposure to the proper stimuli in order to normalize it. But this still leaves us with the question of why people are even getting killed unfairly for no reason to begin with. Why, in a game with such diverse building and crafting mechanics, do people prefer to kill one another on sight, where in games like Minecraft, players have always worked together to make amazing things? Everyday sadism was a strong predictor of amount of violent video game play. It thus appears that causing virtual harm while playing violent video games is particularly attractive to individuals who find pleasure in harming others, i.e., everyday sadists. Could it be that an environment with the potential to create but also destroy has drawn in such hostile players? A system that carries risk and reward, could this be what brings in players with more deviant intentions? Not only is there a reward for attacking other players, but there's also the idea that you're not just getting loot, you are taking away other people's loot. Rust has unintentionally, or perhaps very intentionally, made a system ideal for anyone with sadistic intentions. A simple survival game has become a playground for anyone prone to sadistic behavior. As trait psychopathy is characterized by impulsivity and thrill-seeking behavior, it is possible that thrill-seeking aspects of creating mayhem online is a central motivator to troll. Further, as individuals high in everyday sadism experience feelings of enjoyment from hurting others, this suggests that the trolls are motivated and enjoy inflicting a cruelty online. This is a quote from an article about the behavior behind internet trolling, a behavior very identical to griefing players within video games, only it allows for a broader definition and sense of use. Whereas griefing only pertains to video games, trolling extends to social media and even real life. The intent is often to mislead, frustrate, distress, or generally upset someone. More lighthearted trolling falls within the realm of harmless joking, but extreme cases can lead to cases of cyberbullying or even abuse. Within their study, Natalie and Avita go on to say that both active empathy and cognitive empathy, but not social skills, significantly predicted trolling behaviors. Effective empathy was a significant negative predictor of trolling behavior, corroborating previous research that individuals lower on active empathy measures are more likely to engage in antisocial behavior. Thus far, we know players will kill without need for resources or fear of being threatened. Revisiting what was said earlier about the game mechanics, we also know that when a player is hurt enough, they're downed and their inventory can be accessed and they essentially can be robbed. However, despite that, players tend to kill downed players when they could simply help them up after taking their things. Without tools or a rock, a player has no way of physically harming anyone, and arguably would even be better off dead and spawning fresh with a new rock to harvest with. But even if they beg for their lives, most assailants don't let their victims live. It seems conclusive that in a lawless world where survival is the goal, humans turn to hostile behavior. However, having this world hosted online adds another element to things that isn't present in real life: anonymity. In Christopher P. Bartlett's article about cyberbullying and anonymity online, he claims that anonymity is pronounced because A. The aggressor is not as identifiable and can use fake usernames. B. The bully does not need to have a previous relationship with the victim. And C. No physical scars or marks are inflicted on the victim from the bully. In other words, the aggressor's anonymity may enhance the frequency in which cyberbullying occurs. He continues by saying, feeling anonymous and being anonymous are not identical, and even if the cyber victim can identify their aggressor, the bully may still feel anonymous, which may predict cyberbullying frequency. By simply feeling anonymous, people are more disposed to being cruel towards one another. Not to mention that people with psychotic traits engage in thrill-seeking behavior. With tendencies towards cruelty, which requires a lack of empathy, which in turn encourages psychopathy and hinders a sense of altruism, coupled with a system where those who lose everything, and those who win take everything, Rust was ripe for this sort of behavior, simply by drawing in the wrong crowd for those seeking to simply craft and interact peacefully. With all this aside, is killing another player for survival technically evil? In terms of the game's environment, it could be considered justified when you factor in how many other players are violent from the get-go. Most animals greet strange animals with violence to deter predators, and within Rust, the only difference is that the predators present there are other players. Thank you for watching my video about Rust. This is for my term project for Evil and Humanity within the elective system at Conestoga College. And if you are not the prof for that program and you're watching this video, that means I felt brave and uploaded it to YouTube. So if that's the case, thank you for watching. If you're the professor, thank you also for watching. I hope this video was adequate in explaining the nature of behavior within Rust.